My name is Thomas, and I have always been a devoted Catholic. I grew up attending Mass every Sunday, listening intently to the stories of saints and martyrs, and I never questioned the teachings about heaven, hell, and purgatory. Yet nothing in my life could have prepared me for the near-death experience that would forever alter my understanding of the afterlife. It happened on a rainy autumn evening. I was driving home after evening prayers when a sudden, blinding flash of lightning caused me to lose control of my car. In what felt like an eternity compressed into a few moments, I experienced the terror of the crash metal twisting, glass shattering, and the overwhelming sound of chaos. Then, as my consciousness began to fade, I felt my body give way. I remember a sudden, inexplicable calm washing over me even as I teetered on the brink between life and death. I expected to see a brilliant light or feel the warm embrace of God, as many near-death accounts describe. Instead, I found myself slipping into a realm that was neither the pure radiance of heaven nor the complete darkness of hell. I had entered what I can only describe as Purgatory, a place suspended between divine mercy and divine justice. The landscape was shrouded in a twilight haze, with a somber light that did little to banish the shadows. I drifted slowly through this realm, my senses overwhelmed by a profound mixture of sorrow and hope. Before me stretched a vast plain dotted with souls in various states of torment. Their anguished cries and whispered pleas for forgiveness filled the air like a mournful symphony. It was a place of penance, where the souls of those who had strayed from God's grace labored under the weight of their sins, yet clung desperately to the possibility of redemption. I wandered along a narrow, winding path until I reached a gathering of souls near a cluster of flickering, ghostly candles. There, I encountered a woman who, even in her suffering, exuded a strange dignity. She told me that she had lived a life of vanity and pride, always putting worldly desires above her faith. Now, in this somber expanse, she was forced to confront the truth of her transgressions. Every moment was a reminder of the choices she had made. Yet, as she wept softly, she spoke of a hope that still burned in her heart, a hope that the prayers of the living could one day lighten her burden and hasten her journey toward heaven. Further along the path, I met a man whose eyes reflected an endless despair. He recounted how, during his lifetime, he had been unkind, neglecting both the needy and the teachings of the church. Now, in this intermediary realm, he was bound by chains forged from the weight of his guilt. His voice trembled as he confessed that he felt trapped, unable to move forward, yet not condemned entirely to eternal damnation. He believed that if only his loved ones would pray for him, if only his family and friends would offer up their intercessions, the chains might one day shatter, and he could be granted passage to the eternal light. I listened in silence as soul after soul shared their individual torments and their unyielding hope. It was as if every anguished cry was a plea, not only for forgiveness, but also for the salvation of others. Many of them recounted how the power of prayer, especially the intercessory prayers of the faithful, had begun to ease their suffering. They described moments when a sudden warmth or a soft, comforting whisper would remind them that God was not entirely absent from this place of purification. As I drifted among these suffering souls, I began to understand that purgatory was not merely a place of punishment. It was a process of transformation, a necessary, if painful, purification that allowed a soul to become worthy of entering heaven. Here, the torments were not inflicted arbitrarily. They were a direct reflection of the sins committed in life. Each soul bore its own unique burden, a weight that could only be alleviated through sincere repentance and the prayers of those still living. In that endless twilight, I felt a deep sorrow for those who had taken their earthly lives for granted, yet I also sensed the boundless mercy of a loving God who offered every soul a chance at redemption. One encounter in particular remains etched in my memory. I came upon a small group of souls clustered together in a quiet clearing. Among them was an elderly priest whose eyes, though clouded with regret, still shone with the conviction of his past devotion. He confessed that he had once been so certain of his salvation, so sure that his status as a clergyman would grant him eternal grace. But life had humbled him. The sins he had concealed and the indulgences he had allowed to corrupt his soul had caught up with him. Now, in this purgatorial state, he was forced to face the truth of his actions. Yet even as he recounted his sorrows, he implored anyone who might listen to remember him in their prayers. "Let my suffering not be in vain," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmurs of the other souls. "If only someone will pray for me, I believe my burdens might someday be lifted." The more I witnessed, the more I realized that every soul here clung to hope. Despite the excruciating pain they endured, there was an undeniable light of promise of eventual liberation. The prayers of the faithful, the power of collective intercession, were like a lifeline reaching across the chasm between this realm and the eternal joy of heaven. I learned that many of these souls had formed bonds with one another, supporting each other in their suffering and sharing stories of faith that had once defined their lives. Their shared experiences were a testament to the enduring power of the Church's teachings, a reminder that even in the midst of divine retribution, the grace of God was always present. I recall a moment when I found myself near a shimmering pool of water that seemed to reflect the faces of countless souls. Each visage was marked by anguish, yet many also bore an expression of quiet determination. One soul, a young man who had squandered his life chasing fleeting pleasures, told me that he prayed every moment for forgiveness. "Every prayer is a step toward freedom," he said softly. "I know my path is long, and the pain is almost unbearable at times, but I believe that if the faithful continue to pray for me, I will one day be cleansed and granted eternal peace." In that moment, I realized that purgatory was not a static prison, but a dynamic process, a place where suffering was intertwined with hope, where every tear shed was an expression of a soul's yearning for divine mercy. The very essence of this realm was transformation, a crucible in which the imperfections of mortal life were burned away by the fire of repentance. The more I listened, the clearer it became that the souls here were not abandoned. They were in the midst of a profound, albeit painful, journey toward spiritual rebirth. Time in purgatory seemed to stretch into infinity, and yet I felt that my own presence there was not meant to be permanent. Gradually, the overwhelming sensations of pain and sorrow began to recede, replaced by a gentle pull of beckoning from a higher realm. I felt as though the voices of the faithful were reaching out to me from beyond, urging me to return to the world of the living and to carry with me the message of what I had witnessed. I understood then that my experience was not a punishment, but a calling, a divine commission to share the secret of purgatory and the hope it embodied. In what felt like both a heartbeat and an eternity, I was lifted from that somber landscape. The gray light of purgatory slowly gave way to a brilliant radiance that enveloped my entire being. I felt an indescribable warmth, as though I were being reunited with a long-lost family, and in that moment, I understood that God's mercy had reached even into the depths of that in-between realm. When I finally opened my eyes, I was back in the sterile, familiar environment of the hospital, surrounded by concerned doctors and nurses who marveled at my unexpected recovery. Even though I returned to life, the memory of what I had seen in purgatory has remained with me ever since. It has transformed my understanding of the afterlife, replacing abstract notions with a vivid, lived reality. I now see purgatory as a sacred space of both penance and hope, a place where the suffering of the soul is met with the possibility of divine redemption. I feel an urgent responsibility to share my experience, not to incite fear, but to remind every Catholic of the power of prayer and the importance of living a life of true repentance.